Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Welcome once again to Compass Points. This is the podcast brought to you by the good folks at CompassKnox.com, which is me, Jesse Mayshark, and my colleague, Scott Barker. How you doing, Scott?
Doing great, Jesse. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We're taping this on a Friday. It's a beautiful afternoon. We have a nice weekend ahead of us. I'm feeling pretty good.
Me too. It's been a long, hard week, but the weekend is going to be fun, I think.
All right. Well, before we get to the weekend, let's talk about the week that we have just been through. We've had a fair amount of action on the budget front from several of our local entities that we pay attention to and that we cover diligently at CompassKnox.com, which you can subscribe to by going to our website at CompassKnox.com. Scott, City Council had their budget vote for next year on Tuesday. What happened?
Well, yes, they did. Mayor Indy Kincannon had proposed a $434 million budget and a 50-cent property tax rate hike, which got quite a bit of discussion, not really a lot of pushback. That was kind of an interesting thing. The vote went 7-2 as far as the budget went, and 8-1 as far as the property tax vote. So city residents will be facing a property tax increase. The bulk of the new funding will go to better pay, essentially, for all city employees. So the hope there is that more people will want to come to work for the city. They'll fill some of their positions. Close to 10% of the workforce is currently vacant. The positions of the workforce are vacant. So it's we'll see how that works out, to see if the budget increase and the tax increase that goes along with it will have the desired effects. The vote, there was a lot of discussion. One of the topics that came up, of course, was the impact on lower income residents, who will have to pay more, as every other resident will. One of the interesting things was, city employees were dead set, or they were enthusiastically in support of it. There was no opposition from just everyday folk.
Which I think is really interesting, and I think this is something that's worth noting because, I used to work at the city, as you know. I worked for the city when the last tax increase went through in 2014, and at the time under Mayor O'Hara, we got literally zero pushback. Like, I think we had 4 budget hearings, and nobody showed up to speak against the budget or the tax increase. This time around, I expected that dynamic to be a little bit different. We just came out of a very competitive and kind of contentious round of city council elections where there was a lot of talk about taxes. But almost nobody showed up to speak against it, except one person did show up. Who showed up to speak against the tax increase?
Yes, the one person who showed up was County Commissioner Larsen Jay. Larsen has recently moved back into the city. He'd lived in the city before. He's moved back. That's fueled a lot of speculation that he's going to be running for mayor in 2023.
Which we should say that he has not said that he's running for mayor in 2023, but he has not said that he's not running for mayor in 2023. And also, he has asked us to be clear that this is not the first time he's lived within city limits. He's not a carpetbagger. He's lived in the city. He's lived in the county for almost 30 years, and much of that was in the city. However, most recently, he was living outside the city and just moved back into city limits last year, which has prompted a lot of this talk about what his future plans are.
Right, and what he did on Monday or Tuesday kind of fueled that speculation. While as a city resident, he has every right to address the city council about issues that he thinks are important. It's kind of been the norm that county commissioners don't go to city council meetings and involve themselves in the discussions that go on there. And city council members, likewise, don't go to county commission meetings and do the same thing. So this was kind of a norm-breaking move that Jay made. He went there. He spoke out against the property tax increase primarily because of what it would do to low-income households, any household really, given inflation and kind of the economic uncertainty right now. So he made that argument. But as we said, he may have a political reason to do that, but rank and file people, just ordinary citizens, didn't show up. I ran into a person I know at the grocery store the other day who started railing about the property tax increase, and I said, "Why?" And this person is an engaged person. Well, why didn't you go to county or city council and talk about this? So I think that there were some concerns. They weren't expressed in public.
Right. It's definitely not the case that everybody is thrilled that they're going to get a tax increase. And we did hear from some council members that, yes, they heard from people concerned about it, but basically nobody showed up at the meetings.
Right. Several council members also told me that they heard a lot from developers who were opposed to it. John Valiant is an attorney who represents a lot of developers, did show up to say some of his clients were opposed to it at last Friday's budget hearing, but no one at the budget meeting when they actually cast the votes spoke out against it other than Larsen Jay.
And as expected, one of the no votes on the budget and the only no vote on the tax rate was Councilwoman Janet Testerman.
Yes, Janet Testerman is running for in the Republican primary for the U.S. House seat in the 18th district.
State rep.
Did I say this? Okay, sorry. State House in the 18th district. She had a really difficult time talking about this at the meeting, trying to reach that sweet spot because the pay raise is a lot. More than half the city employees are firefighters and police officers, and so they stand to benefit quite a bit from the new pay structure, and she was trying to go to great pains to say that she supported the police, she supported firefighters, she supported first responders of all kinds and all city employees, but she didn't feel like she could vote for the budget, and she too invoked the concern for low-income people and every family in Knoxville who is struggling to pay their bills during a really uncertain economic time.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I do think that it's interesting that we have now had 3 property tax increases in the city in this century, 2004, 2014, and now, and all of them have gone through without a great deal of public pushback. I guess the next thing that we'll see is whether that comes up in next year's city races, the mayor's race, the council seats that are up, whether that's something that people who run against them, try to make an issue of, that they voted for a tax increase. But at least for now, it looks like Mayor Concannon kind of skated through this.
Yeah, city voters are a little bit more I don't want to say accepting of property tax increases, but they certainly seem to be have an understanding, or at least a belief that the extra services they get for living in the city, they know they have to pay for those services. So I think that there is some, on some level, they understand that or they think that it's a kind of the cost of living in an urban area, whereas the people who live outside the city limits, of course, they don't pay, the tax. They pay county only taxes. They don't pay the extra taxes. They also don't get the extra services. They have to arrange for their own garbage removal and
fire
protection and all kinds of things. So it all depends on what you like. But city officials or city residents do seem to be a little more accepting of the concept that you have to pay more for better services.
Mm-hmm. So the county government is not proposing a tax increase this year for the 23rd straight year. 1999 was the last time there was a county property tax increase. County Mayor Glenn Jacobs has presented a $954 million budget. About 2/3 of that actually is the school system budget. And the county had their own budget hearing last Monday. County Commission did. And there was very little controversy about the actual budget proposal, as you might expect, because it's a pretty good budget from the standpoint of county workers. They're all getting pay raises. Teachers are getting pay raises. Sheriff's deputies are getting pay raises. There's no property tax increase. And a lot of that is thanks to continued very strong sales tax revenue, which of course particularly funds the school system. One interesting thing was that several county commissioners did express concerns about the long-term budget picture, not so much in terms of what the county's doing, but what's going to happen at the national level. Inflation continues to be a concern, obviously. People are talking about the potential of a recession. We just today, Friday, officially entered a bear market in the stock market for the first time in 2 years. The last time that happened was right at the beginning of the pandemic, but before that it was 10 years earlier. Right. And so the economic signals are a little worrying, and Chris Caldwell, the county's chief financial officer, kind of did his best to assure county commissioners that they're trying to take all of that into account. They're budgeting conservatively, even with the tax revenues that they're getting right now, and so he thinks that they'll be able to withstand, whatever downturn happens. And County Commission will have its budget vote at a special called meeting on June 1st. And there was yet another budget that got approved this past week. What was that?
That was actually the largest of the three budgets. A lot of people may not realize it, but KUB has a bigger budget than either the city or the county. The Board of Commissioners approved a $1.1 billion budget for
billion with a B.
With billion with a B. The utility covers all of the city of Knoxville and outlying areas, particularly to the east, up into Granger County and Union County. So anyway, it's $1.1 billion. They are having to raise water rates and wastewater rates a little bit. They've already raised the electric rates. And these were all planned. A lot of what they're doing is funding long-term maintenance issues that that really came to a head 20 years ago, and they
right. They were put under a federal court order.
They were put under a federal court order and still actually are under it, although that they believe that they will be out from under it soon, and that was from the sewer system failings. That's why if you're a long-term resident and KUB customer, you can look back and see that you pay a lot more now for your wastewater than you did back in 2000 and 2001, and that's because you have helped pay for all of the new pipes that are that have kept sewage from overflowing into the community the way it did back in those days. Anyway, KUB approved that. Another big part of their budget is the KUB fiber rollout, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. But they are in the first year of building out their fiber network, which will allow broadband access for people in the electric service area.
Mm-hmm. Any controversy at that meeting? Were the commissioners all supportive of the budget?
They were all supportive. There was no real negative reaction to anything. Of course, one of the things is the KUB board's appointed, not elected. There's not no reason for political grandstanding, and there was none. So they are trying to the main focus that they are going into now is infrastructure and upgrades, and hundreds of millions of dollars are going to the various utility services for upgrades.
Mm-hmm. Well, so to take a little bit of a deeper look at the city budget and some of the thinking that went into council members' votes on it, this week for our podcast guest interview, we sat down with City Councilwoman Seema Singh.
Yes, Seema Singh is she is now in her second term representing the 3rd District, and she was one of the council members who kind of struggled with the decision. She wanted to support city employees, getting more money for them as far as their salaries go, but she also has made it part of her agenda for her time in office to support low income residents. So she had a real a struggle and discuss things, and she also has some issues with the whole process. So we talked to her.
All right. Well, let's go to that interview, and apologies on the front end. The audio may be a little murky here and there. She was actually out of town at a conference and was kind enough to Zoom in with us. So we did the best we could with the technology that we have.
Hi, our guest this week is Councilwoman Seema Singh, who is in her second term representing the 3rd District in the city of Knoxville. And she is joining us from Washington, D.C., where she is attending the Asian American Pacific Islander Cultural Month celebration.
Political conference.
Conference in which she zipped up to after voting last Tuesday on the city budget, and that's the main topic of what we're going to discuss. Mayor India Kincannon had proposed a $434.1 million spending plan for the next fiscal year. It would be was driven as an increase, a good increase, by an overhaul of the city pay structure for city employees. And it required a 50-cent property tax rate increase to fund it. And on Tuesday, City Council voted to gave final approval for the budget. And we are glad to have Councilwoman Singh to discuss it with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great. Well, before we get into your thoughts on the budget itself and the vote, I wanted to ask you what you had heard about the budget, the property tax increase from your constituents and from others in the community between the time that Mayor Kincannon announced the budget and tax increase proposal at the State of the City address and last Tuesday's vote.
I had a lot of phone calls, more phone calls than emails, which was interesting. People really wanted to express themselves to me. I I felt like most of the conversations were 15, 20, 30 minutes because there was a lot of education involved. People were rightfully concerned. The appraisal went up, the value of their house. So they thought that the tax increase they didn't understand the whole readjustment and the tax rate adjustment, which is very confusing. It's still difficult for me to try to explain it quickly. So a lot of it was education on that. And then I gave my opinions on what I thought about it. But whatever vote we did, I wanted people to understand what this actually was, comparing apples to apples kind of thing.
And
sorry, go ahead, Jesse.
Well, I was just going to ask, what was the volume of that feedback, relative to other kinds of controversial or difficult issues that might come to council? Was it one of the stronger reactions you've heard? Was it kind of a moderate level of interest?
When people call for the first time, there are a lot of constituents I speak to on a pretty regular basis, but when it's the first time they're reaching out to their council member, there's strong emotions involved. Mm-hmm. So like I said, I enjoy the piece of doing the education. Some people would listen and feel a little bit better. For other people, it was just too confusing. And they're like, I don't know, just don't do it. Mm-hmm. But the conversations were always good. That's what I try to accomplish.
Well, great. Now, you was the feedback mostly negative, or was it positive? What was once the education part was over with, were they most of your constituents understanding, supportive, opposed it? Nobody likes the taxing. So, that's right. That's almost given.
Right. Except for Bentley Marlowe, who's like, can you pump it up more? So most people began with, they were against it. And so, I would talk them through the process and try to tell them what that would actually mean for them financially each month, talk about what their house was worth. Really get into the specifics with them to help them know that even with this tax increase, it's not going to harm them in the way that they fear that it will. Now, other people that were calling me, mainly employees, saying, please vote for the tax raise, for the budget, for the compensation plan. I would always say, I'm voting for the compensation standards to be raised, but I'm not necessarily going to vote for the budget and the tax rate being increased, and that being the only way that we could actually compensate employees correctly. I thought was a false analogy. So yeah, I'm always advocating one way or the other, depending on where they are. Devil's advocate always.
Well, let's get into that. Your thoughts on the budget. First of all, you mentioned the compensation plan. That is the main driver in the budget, in the budget amount increase and in the property tax increase. So, what are your thoughts on the pay structure itself? Because it's more than just a pay raise for city employees. It's adjusting pay levels all across the board, and both horizontally and vertically, if you will. So,
I think it's been needing to be done. I've been advocating for paying people well in all settings, starting from the baseball stadium and so many other conversations. So it was never in question, do I support becoming a more competitive employer and paying people what they're worth, or a little closer to what they're worth.
Well, so what were your misgivings about the proposal itself? I know you expressed some during the meetings. So what were your the things that concerned you about both the budget and the property tax increase?
So With the property tax increase, I'm not against paying taxes. To me, it feels patriotic. It's like I can't say I love my mother and then not support her. This is me supporting my country. So the issue is not with the increase. It was, I thought it was a false analogy. I mean, there were other things in the budget. Take, for example, I'm not commenting on what I'm supporting or what I don't support, like a good politician. What I'm saying is one could look at I think it was 14 million for the infrastructure around the baseball stadium. It was stated that we were going to be doing that work anyway, and it was not related to the baseball stadium, but it sure does feel like it. So we could have said, okay, we're going to compensate the employees fairly and adjust the wages and pension and future, but we're going to do a property tax increase to cover the infrastructure around the baseball stadium. We could have phrased it that way, but that would have created a whole other set of phone calls. But that's what I was saying. It's why do we always see the employees as last? And it felt like a big manipulation to say, this is the only reason we can't pay the employees fairly, because it rests on the property tax. Does that make sense? That we could have put other expenditures in its place and had a similar conversation. But the way we did it felt manipulative.
If you had done that, if you had assigned the property tax revenues to some other expenditure, my guess is that you might not have had a main assembly room packed with city employees urging you to pass the budget, right?
Right. But I didn't like that all the city employees felt that they had to come in and beg for something to be done right. We should have given that to them and then questioned other things on the budget, in my opinion. But it was a great way for the administration to get a lot of people to advocate for it. It was brilliant.
Well, and we should say that that's very typical in any case of tax increases. They're almost always for police salaries, teacher salaries, like, you know, the meat and potatoes stuff that everybody is going to say they support. That's what tax increases get attributed to.
Right. And so many of the people, not a 100% correlation, but so many people that were absolutely against the tax increase also were very much in favor of increasing the police budget and pay. So it gave us some interesting conversations. You know, we have to pay for these things, all of them.
Right. Did you hear a lot of misgivings, and some council members also expressed this as well, about the impact of the property tax increase on lower income homeowners?
Sure. That's always a concern. We need to set up some more programs for people who are in the lower end and fixed income. Those were the phone calls that were a little bit harder for me to say. I know it's $10 a month or $20 a month, but when you're bringing in $500, $700 on disability, that's a big chunk of difference. So yeah, I looked at all of the different programs that were available to help out low income people, and there weren't many. And we've already missed the deadline on freezing the taxes. I mean, it's very difficult to get assistance. So I would like to address that more. We don't have to be done. What I would have really loved was, I mentioned this at a forum, candidate forum in New York area. It was part of the system to do based on income, make an adjustment on it. They made it very easy to advocate for yourself to reduce your taxes or to keep them frozen. I think here, some of the things we can't do, the progressive taxes, is because the state has tied our hands once again on so many things that could actually help people.
Okay, one of the issues that you had brought up that some of your colleagues brought up, people from both ends of the spectrum. You had Amelia Parker bring this up. You had Lynn Fugit bring it up Tuesday night. That is the budget process and the amount of input that council has, the ability of council, or as it turns out, the almost inability of council to make changes in the budget proposal. I mean, Charles Swanson, the law director, mentioned Tuesday night that the council hasn't been able to change the budget proposed by a city mayor since the 1970s. So it really doesn't happen obviously very often, but it's theoretical, not reality that city council can change the budget in a meaningful way. What are your concerns about that process?
Well, that's half a century ago that this was possible. And I'm going to do a lot of research on how that happened because I'm very interested. So to me, it's about the principle of all 9 council members can vote no on the budget and it will still go into effect. To me, that makes me feel ornamental versus that I have a real role in it. And it's the process that I challenge for the last few times that I voted no on the budget. It's not necessarily the budget. There's so much in there. And when we have conversations like the full day on Friday, and then any of the conversations that came up at the council meeting on Tuesday, we talk about when we start talking about where to cut and where to add, we talk about departments. There are a lot of other things in the budget, but when we talk about departments, it gets really personal. And like I could bring up greenways, and that will really upset many people both ways. I could bring up police. There are people who want to defund that end. There are other people who want to defund the greenways. So it doesn't lead to very good conversations to just go by department. I want to look at some of the other details that are line item. That's a lot. I'm asking for a lot more work. So I need to be careful.
Yeah. Just so that our listeners are clear on that, city council cannot make line item adjustments, but it can only address either funds or department totals. For instance, you mentioned greenways. The only way that you can express a desire to cut greenways would be to cut either the engineering budget or the Parks and Recreation budget. You can't tell them no. You can tell them no. You don't want greenways to be built. New greenways to be built, but you can't make them do it. They can cut somewhere else if they want to. So
right, we have to go with Parks and Recreation. I'm sorry about my phone ringing, and I just want to run across the room. But thank you for clarifying that. It would be, we can't dictate, if I said Parks and Rec or public safety, we couldn't dictate that, yes, make it come out of the greenways or parks. So it's very, very broad. And the more broad it is, the more people get upset about, why are you trying to cut this issue that is so important to me? So it kind of sets it up for, we can't really talk about it it's not a very effective way to say, take 1 million from here and put it here, because still the administration gets to decide where in that category to cut the 1 million or whatever amount.
Do you foresee a way, first of all, to change any of that, I believe it would probably take a referendum, right? Because this is all set in the charter. And is there a way to, let's assume you could propose a referendum and build up public support and change it. Do you know of any cities that have systems with, say, more council input that are not terribly unwieldy? Because the one thing I'm thinking of course, having worked in the city government, and granted, I worked for the mayor's office, but if you think about 9 different people all making their own budgets, in addition to the mayor making a budget, the prospect of doing all that and getting something passed within the relatively compressed time frame that these things happen sounds daunting. That sounds like a lot.
Right. And that was a point that was brought up, that the reason we have it set up this way is so that we have a budget and don't get deadlocked and then don't have funds to pay for things. And I understand that rationale, but I think, yes, unwieldy is a very good word. But there are ways that we could have a little bit more power. It doesn't have to be every single line, but we could definitely have our opinions are taken into consideration, right? We all have meetings with the mayor and we ask for things. Sometimes we get them, usually not, because we ask for a lot more than we know we can get. I mean, there are a lot of projects in the 3rd district I'm really advocating for. Anyway, I think that there is, in New York, I tried to study their system. It was 4 or 5 years ago, but they have a lot more input from their council. I think it is certain departments that they will spend more time looking into. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But it's a lot of work.
One of the things that you're doing right now is you're at the Asian American Pacific Islander Cultural Conference. So tell us about what's going on there.
Sure. Of course, someone's coming to my hotel room. Busy at all. So the conference yesterday was amazing. It was South Asians coming together. That's Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, Bangladesh, Pakistan, people who are interested in politics. A lot of people, South Asians that are working at the White House were there. We also did a budget workshop yesterday, there was a lot of education, a lot of trying to bring together political power and organizing. The immigrant communities across this country were very active during the last election. So this is where a lot of this kind of work happened. But we were talking about, I had a different way of looking at things. Yes, I grew up in Knoxville. I am, my comfort food is hamburgers. I am American, but I also have a different way of thinking about things coming from a 3rd world country. And that was part of our conversation. There are things that we are in somewhat of a difficult time right now. And what is the difference? There are things that I may consider luxury that others may consider essential, but I have a different way. When we tighten our belts, we really tighten them. It gets uncomfortable. It was interesting to just have that conversation, that we actually think of things in different ways by our culture.
And are you seeing, you're obviously the first South Asian council member in Knoxville. Are you seeing, and at this conference, an increasing number of South Asian elected representatives across the country?
I was the only person there from Tennessee.
Uh-huh.
It
doesn't totally surprise me.
Right. And there were 1,000 people there. But yeah, the numbers of representatives from in all levels have really risen since 2016. Not surprising. But yeah, there are a lot more because right now there's so many different generations of South Asians. I'm actually an immigrant. I was born in India, but I am much more first generation because I was raised here. So my daughter in that generation is removed enough. It seems so often when immigrants come to this country, we tend to work hard, do well, and keep our head down. And that's changing in this next generation. So that was also very exciting. And so I'm going to be doing some consulting work here to help with other people who are wanting to get elected and just have some good conversations about what we did in Knoxville.
Cool. All right. Well, Scott, do you have anything else, or are we about wrapped up?
Well, I think we could probably go on for a couple of hours talking with Ms. Singh, but we probably ought to wrap up. We really appreciate you taking the time out.
I'm going to say one last thing. One of the reasons that I challenge the budget so much has to do with fighting the status quo. There are a lot of things we keep doing the same way, and yet we're not doing better in Knoxville. The poverty rates in Knoxville and the numbers of people who have jobs and are still living in poverty. So it makes me question, we need to question all of these things to figure out, one of the things I really tried hard to do was figure out how much taxes people were not, corporations were not paying due to TIFs and pilots. What is missing from our income because of us feeling that that's the way to do economic development. So yeah, it's about just challenging the way we have always done things and assuming that we need to continue the same way. That's my piece. Thank you, guys.
Well, thanks so much. We appreciate you joining us, and hope one day soon you'll be able to come back and talk with us some more.
Oh, I thought you meant come back to Knoxville from DC. I don't know about that.
Yes.
No, I'll be back tomorrow. Thank you,
Safe
guys.
travels.
All right, and thanks again to Councilwoman Singh for joining us. Now we move to the Q&A portion of the podcast. Every week we invite our subscribers via our subscriber-only Facebook group. One of the many benefits of being a CompassKnox.com subscriber is every Thursday we ask people if there's anything that they want to hear about, any questions they have, any topics they want to hear addressed. And so we did have a question this week from somebody following up on some discussion at the City Council budget hearing, and also Commissioner Larsen Jay's comments to council. And some of the council members, including Councilwoman Lynn Fugit, kind of pushed back a little bit on Commissioner Jay, suggesting that the city, in fact, pays a lot of money to support the county school system, which, of course, county government will tend to tell you is a county-only function. So what's she talking about there?
Well, yeah, it was pretty interesting. Mayor Kincannon and Councilwoman Fugit both kind of seemed to push back on Jay for his comments. What Councilwoman Fugit said was, she pointed out, was the 72% of the city's sales tax revenues go to the school system to help fund the school system's budget. Now, they don't do all of that out of the goodness of their heart. 50% has to go.
By state law.
By state law. 50% of the sales tax revenues that the city generates have to go to schools. But they do go above and beyond and go to 72 cents. So there's a 22 cents of every dollar that you pay in sales taxes in the city will go to the school system.
72 cents, but 22 cents more than they have to.
More than required.
Yeah.
And that adds up to about $38 million. And Fugit pointed out that if the city kept that, $38 million a year, if the city had kept that, then there wouldn't have been a need for a property tax increase. They would have been able to cover everything, which, yeah, I suppose that's true. But she also asked Mayor Kincannon if she would look into what it would take to drop back to the state required minimum level of 50%. So it was almost a shot across the bow of Jay. And
be careful what you ask for.
Yeah. Be careful about if you want to butt into our budget discussions. We can butt into yours. But it was very interesting because that's something that is talked about quite a bit in city circles, city government circles, but isn't really spoken about out loud very often.
Well, and it's I believe, and we can triple check this, but I have looked into this in the past, and all of that was set by referendum at the time that the city sales taxes were brought in, because to even implement local option sales taxes, those had to be approved by voters. And as the different levels were brought in over the years, there was always they sold those sales tax increases on the basis that a certain percent of the money was going to go to the schools. So that 72% is basically set by referendum. I believe to change it would also take a referendum. City voters would have to come back and vote and say, no, we only want to devote 50% of our sales tax revenues to the school system. And as far as I know, nobody's making. I don't feel like that would be a very politically popular thing to do, to go out and say we want to take money away from our schools. So I don't know that we'll see that proposal. And it's interesting to note, it is true that the city does this. However, county government also, all sales taxes collected outside city limits, 72% of those also go to the schools, except for one place. Where's that?
Town of Farragut.
That's right. The town of Farragut, when they implemented their own local option sales tax, they kept it at the state minimum. So when you spend sales tax dollars inside the town of Farragut, if you go to the Kroger there or wherever you like to go in Farragut, only 50% of those local option sales tax dollars go to the school system. The other 50% goes to the town of Farragut, which is their primary funding mechanism, because they don't have a property tax in the town of Farragut. So for anything that the town of Farragut wants to do, any improvements they want to make or whatever, that's where their money comes from.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that Farragut doesn't have a property tax, and
they pay county property tax.
County property tax. They don't have a city property tax, and that their funding structure is completely different. They also don't have a police department, which most cities do. So,
well, and I think the other thing to note about city residents paying for the county school system, because you hear this sometimes, the city closed down its schools, which it did in 1988, shut down the city school system and essentially dumped it on the county, because the county is required by state law to provide public education. The city is not. So the county had to take over all the city's old schools. I mean, this was a decades-long process of consolidating schools, renovating them, selling off some of them, and so forth. We've seen all of that. And so it is true that the city, quote unquote, dumped its schools on the county. However, city residents also pay county taxes. And I feel like that particular fact often gets left out of these discussions when people talk about the city versus the county. If you're a property owner in the city, you pay county property taxes. You and I, who both live in the city, pay county property taxes the exact same as anybody else in the county. It's all just based on what your house is appraised at. And so city residents do pay for the county schools just as much as non-city residents do when it comes to property taxes, and also when it comes to sales taxes, obviously.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that it might not be politically popular. No, I don't think it would be. I don't think that that the city will seriously pursue this course, because you're not going to take the money away from the kids,
right?
And that's exactly how it would be portrayed, not only by people who live outside the city limits, but by anyone who would want to get elected running against people who would vote for such a thing.
Well, and it would be literally true. You would be taking money away from the school system.
So it's one of those political postures that happens to be grounded 100% in reality. So anyway, I do know that the city is looking at other sources of revenue, where the places where they have money left on the table. That's often brought up as one. Another one is the city is not maxed out on its local option sales tax,
or the county. Both of them could go up. Is it another half penny?
Half penny, and so they could always try to do that. There are some. There was a move this past session, legislative session, to try to change a couple of state laws that would, in essence, without getting too wonkish, release some sales tax revenues that currently are kept by the state and they would flow to the city instead. didn't pass through the legislature this year, but I'm sure they'll be that the city of Knoxville and other cities across the state will have their lobbyists trying to push that next session.
Yeah, that seems much more likely than trying to redirect the city's funds.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks for the question. And again, if you're a subscriber, watch for our note next Thursday on the Compass Colloquy Facebook group and ask us anything that you're curious about. All right. So looking ahead to the coming week, this is a bit of a quiet week. Of course, we're heading into a holiday weekend, Memorial Day next Monday. And so often you don't see a whole lot of government action in the week leading up to a long weekend, not least because a lot of people take off that Thursday and Friday and things quiet down. However, we do have a county commission meeting on Monday. It's just their regular monthly meeting. The most interesting thing on the regular agenda is actually may not be discussed at all at the meeting because it is going to be on the consent agenda, which means it's an item that they've already talked about. They talked about it at their work session last Monday, and they voted to recommend it. They won't talk about it again before they vote on it unless a commissioner asks to take it off. And what that is a somewhat complicated, but it's a proposal by County Mayor Glenn Jacobs and County Commissioner Randy Smith to change the way that a specific kind of appeal is filed coming out of the Planning Commission. And these are use on review appeals. The use on review, as you know, Scott, you cover Planning Commission.
Yes.
It's basically there are a whole bunch of land uses in both the city and the county that are allowed in certain zones, but only on review. There's two kinds of uses. There's a use by right, which means that if your property is zoned X, here's the things you can do on it, no questions asked. Basically, nobody can stop you. You have a legal right to do it. Right. And then there's uses on review, which means you can do these things in a given zone, but it has to be approved by Planning Commission. Inside the city, actually, those also have to go to City Council. Outside the city, they just go to Planning Commission. So Planning Commission, for anything outside the city, has the final say on whether or not a development can, proceed at a certain density or with a certain drainage plan. There's various kinds of things that get wrapped up into use on review. And if somebody doesn't like that decision, and most often what we're talking about here is like a local neighborhood community group, people who are concerned about the impact of the development, they can appeal that decision not to County Commission, but to the county's Board of Zoning Appeals, which also hears things like variances and so forth. And so what this proposal would do is say that those appeals would no longer go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which is a relatively straightforward process. You pay $200, you file your appeal, and there's a hearing scheduled within like a month or two, depending on when you file it. Instead, you would have to appeal to Chancery Court, which doesn't cost a whole lot more. There was discussion at last week's commission meeting that this would cost maybe $60 more to make that appeal, but it's a more intensive process to go to court, and it also often takes longer. People typically will hire lawyers, although to be fair, neighborhood and community groups often hire lawyers just to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals as well. But so all this resolution is doing is asking the Planning Commission to study it, think about making this change, make a recommendation, and then it would come back to County Commission for approval. And that's why I think there were commissioners who raised concerns about it at the work session. There wasn't a whole lot of pushback on it. Only Commissioner John Schoonmaker, who of course is a very strong neighborhood representative, came out of West Knox Homeowners Association and so forth. He voted against it outright and said he thought it was a bad idea that was going to basically limit people's ability to file these appeals and have a role in the process. But what do you think is going on here?
Well, I think obviously members of the development community have been talking to commissioners and want to eliminate a step in the process. They would I think would argue that it would streamline the process, because you can take a decision currently you can take a decision by the Board of Zoning Appeals. If you don't like it, you can appeal it to
right. You can still go to Chancery Court. Right.
So they're saying, well, let's just take out the middleman and go ahead and just go straight to Chancery Court. I think that the big problem with that is you mentioned it earlier, is that you've got homeowners associations or just groups of residents who would have to hire a lawyer. You don't have to have a lawyer. I saw a post on our Facebook page. I believe it's on our Facebook page. Said you don't have to have a lawyer to go to Chancery Court, but you do if you want to win.
Right.
So it's so anyway, going to court does end up being more expensive, and it's actually more time consuming.
Right, and that's where, so the Knox County Planning Alliance, which of course includes, is a coalition of neighborhood and community groups across the county, came out against this past week. And they made the argument that this isn't going to streamline things, because if you force people to go to court, that often can take, months up to a year sometimes. And the suspicion, I think, on their part is that the goal of this is to basically just discourage people from filing the appeals at all. Taking away the easier way to file the appeal, you make it harder, it just means there are fewer appeals. Now, County Mayor Glenn Jacobs did speak to Commission about this last week, and he said his concern in particular is the ongoing housing shortage that we keep hearing about. We do not have enough supply on the market, basically, to meet the demand here, which is why so many people are having trouble both finding houses to buy and finding houses they can afford to buy. And so his contention is that these appeals to the BZA can delay those kind of developments, by up to 3 months, which might change somebody's whole plan, make it more expensive, make it less likely to happen, and so forth. I also did hear from Andrew Davis, who is Jacobs' policy director and who's kind of been working on this issue, that they have looked at it, because the Planning Alliance said, well, these almost never happen anyway. It's not that common.
Yeah, it's what I think.
Well, the Planning Commission said they had found 13 over the past
13.
15 years. Andrew Davis told me that the county has actually found 19 over the past 15 years, but still that's not very many.
Right.
But he said what concerns them is that there's 19 over the past 15 years, but there's 6 in the last year and a half. And so they think it's something that is becoming an increasingly common tactic for people who are opposed to a project and just want to try to stall it and delay it any way they can, even if they ultimately might lose at the Board of Zoning Appeals, that it just, it can start to become part of a built-in cost of doing a project. And I think that's the concern from the administration. So I don't know if there will be discussion about this at Monday's commission meeting. Like I said, it's on consent right now. However, there's been a lot of talk online about it. It's possible a commissioner wants to pull it off to talk about it a little bit more, or maybe they will wait for it to go to Planning Commission, see what they have to say about it. Of course, there will be opportunity for public input both there and then if it comes back to County Commission.
Yeah, the Planning Commission would, their staff would take a real deep dive into it and really look at all the different angles there, and then it would come up for discussion. And you can bet that there would be a lot of discussion, a lot of give and take, and a lot of public input before they made their recommendation.
And one interesting note about the timing of it, again, Jacob's office says that they're introducing this now just because this is a problem that they see, something that's becoming a problem that they want to try and address. It is also true that the Knox County, one of the co-founders of the Knox County Planning Alliance is Kim Frazier, who is currently a candidate for the at-large 11th District Commission seat. She's going to be the Republican nominee, which basically makes her the favorite to win that. I think most people are anticipating that come September, Kim Frazier is going to be sitting on County Commission. And so it is possible that the hope is to get this to Planning Commission and back to County Commission before Kim Frazier is actually sitting on County Commission, because based on what we've already heard from the Knox County Planning Alliance, I think we can, and what the Planning Alliance said in their statement, they didn't say they're 100% against this idea. They said it should be talked about as part of the broader advanced Knox revamp of the county's entire, their general plan, their transportation plan, and so forth. If we're going to talk about this, they say, let's talk about it in that context and not just kind of like do it in a hurry right now. So again, that may or may not be talked about. Another issue to watch for Monday night is a very contentious rezoning in South Knox County. Thunder Mountain LLC is proposing to build a big residential subdivision down off of Chapman Highway in the Dry Gap community. And that has raised a lot of concern from local residents down there. It's been delayed for a few months. as the developer has met with the neighborhood group. But that is anticipated to come back Monday, and unless it gets delayed again, that's probably going to be a pretty contentious discussion. And Scott, what have you got coming up?
The Sports Authority decided not to meet this month, so I was robbed of the opportunity to.
You're literally the only person in Knoxville who's sad that the Sports Authority is not meeting this week.
I probably am, but this is typically the week that they would meet. They are not. And so I'm left with nothing to do whatsoever. So what I thought I would do is look at an update of how the broadband rollout that KUB is going into and how that's working. We're going to have, I believe it's about 25,000 people who will have broadband access.
I'm one of them. I am in the first phase.
Through KUB by the end of the year. They are working in 3 areas of the city of Knoxville right now. They're working in East Knoxville, parts of North Knoxville and Fountain City, and then there will be. They haven't really gotten completely on into it yet, but the other area is the Amherst, Cumberland Estates area in northwest Knoxville, and so they are putting in the infrastructure now. They are hiring people. They're getting ready to roll out their web page that's going to have how you sign up and how you pay your bill and all that. So I'm going to have an update on Monday about that, and we'll go into their finances. We'll go into the where it's rolling out, where they're going to go next after those 3 areas. So I know a lot of people are real excited about the KUB's effort, and a lot of people really didn't like it. A lot of people were opposed to it, especially our folks at Comcast. So our friends there. Anyway, so that update will come Monday.
All right. Well, and I know for a fact that they're getting ready to do this because they are in my neighborhood right now in Oakwood Lincoln Park, tree trimming and getting ready to run those lines.
Yeah, they are running the lines. They're also installing these really funny little things called huts that are kind of the fiber equivalent of a substation, and they're going to be these little structures you see throughout the area. I believe 20 of them throughout the KUB service area.
So when we see that, that's not the government spying on us.
Well, it still could be.
It could be the
government spying on us, but the primary function is to serve as the substation, as you would, if you will, for the fiber optic network.
All right. Well, look forward to reading that. And as always, you can read everything we write and receive our weekday email by going to CompassKnox.com and subscribing. And we will see you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.